with Keslow featuring Katy Keene, the CW's Katy Keene. First, I want to introduce myself. My name's Court Weeks. I'm the GM here at Vancouver, in Keslow, Vancouver. And next to me is Leslie, who will be co-hosting with me. She is the Executive Director of Marketing here in Vancouver. And we are going to be talking all things Katy Keene today. I also want to give a quick shout out to a couple people, to Eric Scheitinger at TCS in New York, who helped us very, very much on this project, and our operations team in Atlanta. They helped us as well due to where actually New York is. With that said, I want to get a quick guest bio. Brendan is a renowned cinematographer known for his work on various projects such as Riverdale, Child's Play, and Katy Keene. Brendan cut his teeth shooting independent films and has worked his way up to bigger projects over the years. He is a member of the ICG 600 and 669 and currently lives in Los Angeles, California. Roberto Aguirre Sacasa. Roberto is the co-creator, executive producer of the CW show Katy Keene. He is also the creative executive producers of CW's Riverdale and Netflix's The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Prolific writer, he has also written for the Emmy-nominated series Big Love, Looking, and season 1 of Supergirl. He is in the feature world, he wrote MGM's new version of Carrie's along with the serial thriller, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Up next, he has an ABC pilot called The Brides, about the iconic brides of Dracula, and an HBO Max pilot, The Shelley Society, which reimagines Mary Shelley as a monster hunter. Could go on and on about these two very talented people. Let's get this going. I first want to start off by asking you guys both kind of a two-part question, if you will. How did you and Brendan meet initially, and how has your relationship flourished with all the multiple projects that you have worked on, and as a co-executive, co-creator, executive producer, and a DP relationship, how that has sort of evolved over your time together?
Great question. I think Brendan and I met in between season 1 and season 2 of Riverdale. We had finished season 1 of Riverdale, and we were looking for a new DP, and I think it was our line producer sent us Brendan's reel, which had a lot of clips from a show Brendan was doing called Van Helsing, I believe. And it was incredibly stylish. We were blown away by the way that the light looked. We were blown away by how the horror was rendered. And I always like working with people who have worked in genre like horror or suspense, because it usually means that they have a really strong point of view and they have a strong aesthetic sense. I reached out to the showrunner of Van Helsing, who I'm friendly with, and within 5 seconds he responded, "Brendan's a star. You'd be lucky to get him." So then I think we chatted, Brendan, and not long after that, you became Riverdale's DP, and we really prided ourselves on Riverdale that we set a very specific look for the show. It had a retro vibe. It used a lot of atmosphere. It was very cinematic, stylized, lots of close-ups, lots of slow motion. You know, I always joke that I say that when I meet people and talk about Riverdale, I very rarely hear, "The writing on Riverdale is so good." What I usually hear is, "Oh my God, that show is so beautiful." So we were really particular about who was going to be our next DP. But Brendan came in and I thought met the standards that we'd established, and very soon was exceeding them. So I think that's how we started working together. Is that your understanding, Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, that timeline sounds, that's definitely, that's right. That was a great way to hear about it, because I don't think we've ever really, recapped on it like that. So that was that was good, but it was the same thing from my understanding. I mean, I remember getting the call from Connie, I think it was Connie at the time. And I remember the first phone call with you, Roberto, and we were just talking about atmosphere, making sure it had this style and this kind of, very cinematic feel with slow motion, and just really doing something that was different from regular what you kind of think of as typical television, and trying to make something special.
Yeah. And that second season of Riverdale, Brendan, I don't know how much we've talked about this too much, but it had a much stronger genre element than season one. It had a serial killer. It had the two gangs fighting. It was a real mix of tones. We'd frequently cut between musical numbers and brutal like beatings, and it was a real tightrope act to walk. And again, you knocked me out. I think some of our best sequences are still come out of season two. I think of that amazing fight in the rain between the bulldogs and the serpents. That we had talked about. Our references were like The Outsiders and very specific things like that. And I remember the network and studio were sort of terrified that we weren't going to be able to deliver that. And they said, cut it in script. They fought it and they said, cut this. And I thought, no, I think we should be able to do this. And when I first saw the footage from that fight, I was blown away. We'd never done anything like that on the show, and it was so stylized and so beautiful. And again, in keeping with the noir-y and the pulpy vibe of the show, but really elevated. So it was it was. I felt like we really lucked out to be working with Brendan.
Yeah, that was early. That was I think that was the 4th episode. And that was a big one because we shot on Phantom cameras. So we were like 600, we had to get so much light in there just to make sure we could see everything. And it was a tough, I remember setting it up and kind of talking about it with the crew and just trying to get it, to a place where we could deliver and know that and we shot that. I can't remember what time of the year that was. It must've been
in the fall. Yeah.
So we had, I guess, a decent amount of night, but we shot overnight. We shot from sundown to sun up kind of thing, and we had to make sure we could get everything. But it was a challenge, that one, but it turned out, yeah.
I mean, they were sort of all challenges. Between season 1 and season 2, Riverdale really grew. Our ambition grew. Our scope grew. We became much more of an action show. Season 1, we were sort of more traditionally a kind of a teen coming of age show, and we exploded in season 2 with all these new elements. Even though we'd sort of planned that it was going to be a coming of age show, every episode it sort of got bigger and bigger. And I remember one sort of vivid memory I had during shooting season 2 that involved Brendan is probably, I would say, about halfway through the season. Brendan, you sent me an email and you were talking about how you wanted to use color and light differently on the show. And you referenced Dick Tracy, I think the movie, the Warren Beatty movie, Dick Tracy.
Yeah.
And you had stills of how they used color in that, and against sort of the streets and buildings and things like that. And you said, is it okay if I try that? And I love it when I get emails from anyone I'm working with that says, I want to make the show better. Can I try this? That's the dream collaboration. And I remember saying, yeah, go for it. And then kind of 2 or 3 episodes passed and I didn't see it. And I thought, oh, I wonder what happened with that idea Brendan had. And then we were doing the riot night, Brendan, the episode right before the riot. the crowd scene in front of the police station.
Yeah.
And I remember when those dailies came in, everything that Brendan had talked about in terms of color and light and introducing a sort of a new kind of cinematic vocabulary to the show was there. So I thought, okay, well, here it is. This is what Brendan was talking about. And of course I loved it. So it was a real, it was that was sort of more towards the end of the season. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I'm a creature of habit. When I find people that are working kind of at the top of their game and they're sort of obsessive about it, I want to keep working on stuff with them. So I think it's at that point I was sort of like, wow, I kind of want to be in business with Brendan for a long time. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember that email. I remember that. I can't remember what the first episode, when I sent you that email, what that episode was initially in part of. Yeah, that prompted it, because I remember doing something where then we were like, I remember looking at it thinking this wasn't working at that time, and kind of going back from it.
Yeah, well, it's the other interesting thing is, I season 1 of Riverdale, I didn't have a bad relationship with our DP, but I didn't really have that much of a relationship with our DP. I would go for table reads and I'd visit a little bit, but I never kind of got in the nitty gritty with our DP. And I also remember, Brendan, that I mean, you emailed me kind of throughout, and you would talk when you would see color corrections and you would see this. And you would I remember you were really hands-on about all of that stuff, and it really impressed me. You were really worried. You were really not worried, but you were very on top of like the actors looking a certain way. You were on top of the temperature of scenes. When you worked on something on the day, on the set or on location, you didn't want that to be washed out or that work erased when we were in post. Right. So I remember having much more of a back and forth and a dialogue with you throughout that season.
Yeah.
But you just rolled into it really nicely into one of the other questions I had, which was, how important is the DP to you, and are just the visuals important? Obviously, they're huge as it relates to many, many projects, but it sounds like your relationship as a whole too creates something great in person and on screen as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I started as a playwright, and I never imagined that I would be running, and in the case of Katy, Keene, co-running a show and have to be aware of things like makeup and costumes and things like that. I always saw myself kind of, as I said, mostly a writer. However, I think that from when the Riverdale pilot got picked up, and again, I remember everyone saying that it looked so different from everything on the CW, and it really looked like an indie film, and it just had a really strong visual sense. That from that moment on, I sort of became much more aware of that than I was kind of when I was working on other shows. On other shows, I would cover set for my episodes, but I wasn't in editorial. I wasn't thinking in those terms. But after Riverdale, I sort of thought, oh wow, it's so hugely. I mean, every detail, every one of the shows we do is so curated, every detail, and first and foremost is the overall look of the show, and I think I think that's why when we were doing the new show, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and we were looking for someone to kick that show off. It was sort of in between. It was sort of after season 2 of Riverdale. I think, Brendan, I remember that you had done such great work on Van Helsing, a horror show, and we really wanted someone who knew horror to work on Sabrina. That I reached out to Brendan and said, will you come and direct DP a few episodes of Sabrina? So it's hugely important to me. It's one of the biggest decisions, that you make early on. And, again, it's so clear when someone is passionate about what they're doing and when someone cares about the show. I think that's what makes shows great, when you're working with people who are deeply invested in the storytelling, and it's not just a job, it's an art. And I felt that with Brendan, but it's hugely important. It's funny, I interview people for the different shows, and one thing that people, and be it writers or editors or crew or whomever, they say, frequently they say stuff like, it seems like this show's a lot of work. And I'm always like, it's a lot of work. Like, if you're not up for a lot of work, then probably we shouldn't go any further, but it's really important.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when Sabrina was coming around, because I think that was right. I think I left Riverdale season 2 and started Sabrina that same, like the next week or 2 weeks later. I think I took a couple of days off and went away to Italy and came back. And then, but I remember having, like, we were talking about it during Riverdale still, like in the last few episodes. And I remember having a dream about shooting it.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to you about
Yes,
that, and
yes.
and then we were like, okay, well, maybe this is meant to, maybe we should do this.
Yeah, and and of course, as an executive producer, I also love when people say, "I know your shows are hard. I still want to do it." That's always a nice feeling. And Brendan, remind me. I think when we were doing Sabrina, we had a lot of conversations about how the show would look similarly to Riverdale and how it would look different.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we had a lot of discussions about light, and I remember early days. I think I got back some stills, and I remember we were talking, and I was like, no, too bright. It's a different. We're going for kind of a different, darker, richer, more shadowy kind of, even more so than Riverdale, which still had bright pink and that. Do you remember those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I remember. Yeah, I remember making sure that we wanted to have it feel like it was in the world with texture and things like that, but we also wanted to make sure that it stood on its own feet and had more of a muted feel, from what I remember.
I remember that. Yeah, did you shoot episode 3, Brendan?
I did, yeah.
I remember we were shooting at a church, and I think you sent me some stills with like light coming out of the church.
Oh yeah.
And I remember thinking, no. These are witches. They're not advertising that they're in a church. And although it was a beautiful image, and it usually is exactly what I'm looking for, is that kind of striking sense. I remember thinking, no, these witches are meeting in secret. They wouldn't have, that spotlight. Yeah. However, if I recall correctly, in episode 6 of that first season, when we were doing our homage to The Exorcist with the 4 people arriving at the house,
yeah, it
was that you kind of gave me that light streaming out of the house to kind of create that Exorcist vibe, and it was sort of, so we found the place for that instinct. Is that right?
Totally. Yeah. I remember I sent it was a photo from, I feel like it was from like Texas Chainsaw Massacre of the house, like one of the remakes of it, and they like just blasted the back of the house with light, and it was this like surreal feeling. So I remember thinking, is this the right thing for the church? And yeah, you explained everything you just said, where absolutely, they're in hiding and it shouldn't be that, and they don't want to be, openly advertising where they are. And so we went away from that for the establishment of the church. But yeah, when we did the Exorcist episode, yeah, we've tried to remake the kind of like the feeling of the poster from the original Exorcist.
So iconic. It was the episode where Sabrina does an exorcism, and it's funny. I would say that through all of the shows, Riverdale, Sabrina and Katy Keene, we all those shows are pop culture shows, and all of those, when I think of pop culture, the Archie comics are pop culture. I always say that. And Sabrina is a character of pop culture. Katy Keene is a character out of pop culture. So the shows are very much in dialogue with other touchstones of pop culture. So we do our share of homages. And when we were doing that episode of Sabrina, it was an exorcism episode, which was one of my favorites that we did of the series. It was one of the truly scary ones, but it was in dialogue with every exorcism movie and every exorcism that we've seen in film and in television. Obviously we made it our own. But it's one of the really true horror episodes we did of Sabrina. That some of the episodes have scary stuff and monsters and demons and things, but that episode is to me was like a horror movie. It was a 1 hour horror movie, kind of almost self-contained.
Yeah, I think that might have, that one and the one that we did with the sleep demon those are like God. Two of my favorite ones that we did.
Well, it's so funny, the exorcism one was episode 6. The episode that Brendan is referencing, it was episode 5, and it was that the Spellman, Sabrina and her family were trapped in their house by a sleep demon who had trapped each of the characters in a nightmare. And I think, Brendan, you and the director gave each of the nightmares, each of the vignettes, and they were all really, really horrific nightmares, its own look and its own color. And again, I remember vividly, Brendan and Maggie, the director, wonderful director who we worked with on Katy Keene, said, yeah, and I remember in the Sabrina nightmare, you and Maggie or someone had said to me, and we're gonna really push light in this one, and there's gonna be red light, and we're gonna know we're in a dream. And I remember thinking, okay, let's see how that's gonna look, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
The other thing I remember from that episode is I went to visit the set one day of that episode, and it was the day, Brendan, that you and Maggie were shooting Ambrose giving an autopsy to himself.
Yeah.
And it was an actor, a dummy, and then the sleep demon was an actress wearing tons of prosthetics.
Yeah.
And she couldn't see. And we were packed, there were so many people packed in this tiny set. There was fake blood everywhere. It was sticking to everyone. It was about 400 degrees. And I started to have a panic attack. And I remember both how cool and collected you were and Maggie were amidst this like just bonkers insanity. And I remember I literally said, I gotta get out of here. Like I can't take being in here. It's too much. But I thought that was a real grace under pressure moment.
Those are honestly, those are the moments I like the most. I like it when it's like, when there's high pressure.
Oh yeah.
When it's like you were saying before, I thrive when it's not an easy show. That's the best. Like I don't want to do, if it's just an easy show, it's kind of, it's boring. I don't want to just do the same thing over and over. So I love those challenges. And when I'm in situations like that, because that was a very complicated thing because we were doing we were layering images. So we did, one pass with with our actor on the table and the other pastor is standing, so you can mirror it together and it looks like it's two of him. And as we're doing that, it's just like, you know, your mind's racing 100 miles a second, and you're just kind of trying to make sure you're not going to do anything that's going to be complicated later on or cause more problems than needed later on. And yeah, but that's where it's the most fun, because that's when you're activated.
And that was one of our few true bottle episodes. We did that completely on our stages, and you know, I think most shows do bottle episodes so that the episode is easier to produce, and this one was more complicated than any of the others because of all the gags and as many elements as each scene had.
Yeah.
Brendan, can you talk a little bit more technically on the choices you made, camera-wise, lens-wise, for Katy Keene, and how they've differed from shows you've used and gear you've used in the past in your past shows? Sure. And is that a collaboration that the two of you have together as well in discussion pre-production wise?
Yeah, it is. I mean, so when we started Riverdale, when I started Riverdale, I took over the camera package that was established in season 1. So the same camera and lenses we used. We were on Alexa with Leica Summilux lenses. The only change I made in season 3 of Riverdale, when I started season 3, I left early, but when I started it was I just went all minis rather than Alexa XTs. It went Alexa minis, but kept the same lenses and everything. When I went over to Katy Keene, when we did the series of Katy Keene, at least, we shot on the same cameras, so we shoot Alexas, but we switched our lenses to master prime anamorphics and master anamorphics. And I remember thinking at the time, I was, you know, when I did the pilot, I shot on large format DXL2s with Primo lenses. And then when we went to do the series, I wanted to make sure that the lensing had an aesthetic that was different from what we were used to in the normal situation. And I wanted something that was really warm and kind of creamy looking. So I wanted the backgrounds to be able to really fall off quickly and all these sorts of things. And I remember talking to Roberto about it. And I think we did camera tests with a bunch of different lenses and formats. And I sent Roberto some ideas. And then I think we looked at them and we finalized on the camera test itself, where we put the actors in front of the lenses, you know, we finalized choosing the master anamorphics because a few things. One is they gave a beautiful look to the show. Obviously, we shot 2-to-1, which was really nice because it was just a little bit wider than our Riverdale, and we wanted to make sure that we're feeling.
Sorry, did a lot of that expansion of shooting anamorphic have to do with the small scenarios you're shooting with in New York, in the settings in New York? And obviously a lot of it's on stage, but you know,
a lot of the series is on stage in the middle, but we get out at the end and we get out a lot at the beginning. But it's more that it was to make sure that when we're doing a shot on an actor, you have that around them so that the city of New York is part of the story still, and it's a character in the story. That was something that Maggie and I and Roberto were talking about in the pilot a lot, was making sure that New York felt like a character, like it was really present and we were there, and it wasn't, you know, because. And
you both accomplished that entirely. It was awesome.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I remember we just wanted to make sure that, you know, it's the story of these 4 characters trying to make their dreams come true in New York, and New York is kind of throwing them challenges all the time. So we want to make sure that New York is felt. And so when we chose to go anamorphic, it was partially for making sure we could see a lot of space around them, but giving it a really soft quality, because those master anamorphics they're amazing. They're the most beautiful anamorphic lenses I've ever used, I think, when you're getting away from like anything that's too, you know, crazy, when you're not looking for that old anamorphic look of distortion and that sort of thing. And they're like the most perfect anamorphics I've ever seen. You can frame up on, you know, we have such a beautiful cast, like they're all flawless looking, and you put a camera on them, you don't want it to distort their face weird. You know, you want to make sure that they look great, and you don't want to have to think, okay, I can only frame them like right in this little area. If they're off to the side, they're going to be all stretched and warped and weird looking. So these lenses we knew they were, the best of the best for that.
Brendan, what went into the choosing the rear flare elements for the master anamorphics? Because I know you tested the front ones and the rear ones.
Yeah, it felt like when we put these front ones on and the rear ones on, that the front ones just kind of flared it a little too easily. And it wasn't a flare that I was really into. It didn't look like a real anamorphic flare. It had the elements, but it also felt a little smeary or something like that. Like I remember it just not rendering in a proper, clean way. So when we took that off and we had just the rear one, it just felt much cleaner and not nearly as in your face. And that was something that was important. You don't want to have like these 3 or 4 actors in a frame and a light that's pinging across their eyes. We wanted to make sure that we had that control all the time. So we played around with looking at rear ones, front ones, and a combo of both, and we took away the combo in the front.
When shooting an anamorphic, as you know, wide lenses are kind of tough, especially if you're shooting dialogue scenes. Can you remember what the widest lens you used on dialogue scenes? And did you have anything was there anything playing with that at all? Did you have any?
I think if we were, yeah, I think I'm trying to remember all the focal lengths of what lenses now. But I remember like when we were in the wider lenses, we tried to stay away from the 25s or whatever on an actor's close up. We would go a little longer to the 40s and something in that range or up. But we used the wider lenses when we were doing wide shots of a location, because like a lot of our sets were pretty small. Like Katy's apartment was a really tight apartment, and there's always scenes with 4 of them in there sitting around. So to get any kind of a wide shot, we had to go to our wider lenses and back the cameras up against the walls or whatever it was. And that was something that we embraced. But the nice thing about, like, since we were shooting anamorphic, you're capturing 2:40, but we were framing for 2:1. So that little edge on the sides was gone for us. And that's where most of the distortion in any one of these lenses is actually felt. So we were really using like the cleaner middle parts of our lenses anyways. So the distortion was very, very minimal. But every lens has distortion. There's not a single lens out there that doesn't have some sort of distortion. So it was just making sure that we were mindful of it and not being, not allowing it to kind of, if we felt like it was distorting someone's face, we would avoid it.
And I know you've shot a lot in Los Angeles and you shot a lot in Vancouver. Was there a lot more challenges as being a DP in the New York area and in Manhattan? I know that can create some interesting issues, and I don't know if Roberto, you want to expand on that as well.
No. I'll let Brendan take this.
Yeah, there were like, New York was amazing to shoot in. Like it's New York. It's like such an amazing city, and you point a camera in any direction and it looks fantastic. And there's so much history and texture in every direction. But everything shooting wise there is a little more of a challenge than other cities that I've been to, because like it's a massive city with a ton of people, and you have to take everyone into account, and you can't just lock up streets easily. You can't put lights on lifts wherever you want them, because sometimes that's like the middle of Park Avenue or like somewhere where it's just, you can't block it and you can't take over. And the steps or is that the steps to do so are so big that it's like you have to go through 10 steps and multiple permits or whatever is involved, and it just becomes a much bigger ordeal. Whereas shooting like Riverdale and Vancouver, you could put a light anywhere. You could block any street and own it, and you could, they're very easy. It was very easy, and you could just redirect traffic. But in New York, it's a different game completely. It's just, and like when it comes to company moves, you think about like you're shooting in Chinatown, and then in the same day you're up in like the Upper East Side, and you're doing a company move to get down there, and you schedule a day, and it looks like, okay, on paper, you're like, oh yeah, this is like 5 pages or whatever it is. This is doable, but then you got to take into a 2-hour, downtime of traveling down to Chinatown or whatever it is. So it's like company moves become a huge thing, and just it's a, but like we had a great producers in New York who are from New York, who knew the city, knew the ins and outs and all the right people to talk with and the right times to schedule things and how to do it. And with their help, of course, it was a success, but it was definitely, from my side of things, it was always I remember just being like, can we do this? And I was like, well, we can, but maybe not this time, because there's too many, like, it's not enough time to get all the permits. And, like you need like 3 days to get all your permits. And sometimes in some places you can do it the night before, and, just a lot of extra challenges and steps.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure. And with Katy Keene, is there for the both of you, is there a particular scene or episode that the both of you are super proud of? Not just the look, but watching both Riverdale and Katy Keene, there's so many variables that you guys do musicals, you do dance numbers, you do this and that. It's all over the place, and it just comes together so seamlessly. Is there anything sort of particular to Katy Keene that you guys are proud of that you were able to put together, whether it's an episode or a scene?
For me, I think, we shot the pilot of Katy Keene in New York. We knew we were going to shoot the pilot of Katy Keene in New York. It was a little bit of a question. Were we going to shoot the series in New York? Sometimes pilots shoot in New York, they establish New York, and then they move to Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver or another show. And I remember the Michael Grassi, my co-creator and co-showrunner of Katy Keene, who was very much more so than me, boots on the ground in New York, said the show has to be done in New York. You can't do it in these other cities. He's Canadian. He's from Toronto. He said, you cannot do New York and Toronto. So we made that big leap and committed to New York, even though there were all of the challenges Brendan said, on top of the financial challenges. But I think what I'm proudest of is that the show feels like a New York show, like Sex and the City, like those shows that really shoot in New York, and you can feel the character of the city. I think for me, we go there in the pilot, we go there in the second episode, and we go there in the finale, which airs tonight. We go to one of my favorite spots in New York, which is the Little Red Lighthouse, under the GW Bridge, and by the Hudson River. And to me, and I lived in Washington Heights, very close to the Little Red Lighthouse, for 10 or 11 years. And I would go there once a month, once every couple of months. So it really was one of my favorite sort of secret spots. And I think that Katy really captured a New York that even shows that shoot in New York often don't go to. It's a little more off the beaten path. It's a little more timeless. It's a little more like a fairy tale. To me, going to the Little Red Lighthouse is almost like a fairy tale scene. There's just this little beautiful kind of like kid-size lighthouse. So I think that's what I'm proudest of is having made the commitment to New York, really, really feeling that through the season.
Yeah. I remember when we were doing the pilot, we were talking like, let's make sure we show New York as much as we possibly can to make sure that when we come to series, it's a little more undeniable to not be shooting here. But yeah, there were tons. Like the underneath the GW Bridge was like a location that I think we went there 3 or 4 times throughout the season, and it was a challenge to get there every time, but it was always like a payoff, like a great payoff. It was such a nice place to shoot.
Yeah, we never had bad weather. One of my favorite scenes and shots is in I think it's episode 2, where Kelly and Katy go back to the Little Red Lighthouse, and he's got the engagement ring that he's found, but he doesn't give it to her. But it was sort of like that amazing magic hour in New York where everything was gold. The Hudson River was gold. KO Zane has never looked more handsome, and it was so romantic. I'd say that's probably the other big, or one of the other big differences between Katy Keene and the other shows is Katy Keene is so romantic, and it's about the character's romance with New York. It's romance with the idea of being an artist in New York. It's the romance of those friends, and I think that is another thing that you captured, Brendan. That's different from the other shows. You really it's so aspirational, as opposed to the horror of Sabrina or the pulpy noirish quality to Riverdale. There was a romanticism to Katy Keene.
Yeah, that was something we always talked about as well. Like, obviously you talked about with you, Roberto, and then Maggie, and everyone was just, and Michael, just making sure that it had that like romantic feel all the time, that warmth. When we were trying to find the look of the show, when we were I remember sitting in, in the offices in the pilot with Maggie and you, and we were putting pictures up on the walls and trying to find what felt right as far as the tonality of the show. And once we started looking into these warm, really, because I think Riverdale feels cool overall. Sabrina feels kind of coldish, but but it's colorful, but it has kind of a cold, dark shadow to it. And then, inky blacks. And then Katy Keene has this like very warm, rich, kind of soft, romantic, creamy feel to it.
That's I was about to say. It feels. That's right. Creamy is sort of all those sets, and it's funny. Because Katy Keene was in New York, Michael was in New York much more than me, but I always really enjoyed going. And I remember being on set, and then of course seeing the episodes, so blown away. And the sets are beautiful, but the way you lit them and it had this, as exactly as you said, this sort of warm creaminess to it, that this richness to it that was sort of spectacular. For me, if you're in talking about other moments, I was actually talking to Michael about this. One of the episodes that aired a couple of weeks ago was the Meta Gala, which was the Katy Keene version of the Met Gala. And Brendan, I love the shot of when Katie's walking up the steps to the location where the Meta Gala is.
Yeah.
And to me, that completely captured the essence of the show. It's like, you're in your 20s, you're going to an incredibly fancy event in New York, but you're going there to work it, but you're still going to it. And it captured that. And, I remember being in my 20s and working galas at the theater where I worked in this, and there was such an excitement about the event, but we weren't going as guests. We were going there to work it. And in a way, it's sort of like to me, it's the perfect Katy Keene moment. It's like, you're not quite there yet, but you're so close, and you're excited, and she's got the bag over her. And it so captured what the show, I think, is trying to say about being artists in your 20s, what that feels like. That one shot captured it for me.
Yeah, that's great. I remember like talking to so many people, including the cast, Lucy and Julia and everyone, continually throughout the season, just about how much like what the characters are going through are things that we've all gone through as we're coming up with our careers of this fight for, and this push for, to make your dreams come true, and to really, to be going through the ups and downs, and to have the support system that they have, but it's an interesting thing, because there's so many times throughout the show that I would watch it and watch the performances live on the day as we were filming them, where I was just like, it would hit home in a way, you know, you're like, oh yeah, you know, I feel that, and I've been through that, and I know exactly that kind of a moment or understanding of, you know, their decisions, and that was pretty neat.
Yeah.
We had a question just pop through, and this is kind of for both of you too. And Roberto, you mentioned Sex in the City, but I'm going to direct this to Brendan first. This is from Dylan DeCatau, who's in LA. The lighting and color is beautiful in these shows. You mentioned Dick Tracy as an influence. Any other films or TV shows that you were inspired by for any looks that you do, Brendan? And Roberto, you mentioned Sex in the City, and I can't help to mention and bring up that when I was watching Katy Keene, one of my favorite movies, I kept just thinking of Mannequin.
Oh my, well, that's, well, you know, we mentioned Mannequin in the show, you know, hot his, yeah, well, we
I love that movie, and I just
Yeah,
I couldn't help but bring it up because I just like, oh my God, that's like, there's so many similarities, good similarities involving Mannequin. But Brendan, if you could, you know, talk to everybody and let us know what sort of inspires you, movies, TV shows, because you do have a great look. You're very visual, and you know, what you put on screen is very beautiful, and it would be great to hear what inspires you.
I mean, what inspires me is maybe a little different from what that initial question was, I think, because like what inspires me is just passion, you know, like honestly, it's like anytime I'm talking to someone who's passionate about what they're doing, that's inspiring. Like when I read stuff that's, you know, from the heart, that's the best. That inspires me. When I look at a great photograph and I hear someone talk about it, that's inspiring. When I watch a great film or a great performance, or like even in the technical side, if it's the cinematography, of course, or the editing, like just anything where someone didn't just do the basic, where they put some extra heart and sweat and blood into it, where they really push themselves, that inspires me. So, and that actually translates into many of the things that I do, I think, because I think there's always that voice in my head as I'm working, you know, that reminds me about these inspirational things that other people have done. And like, you know, just kind of the drive of, you know, what I'm after and what I'm trying to get to. And I, you know, also knowing that I'm never quite satisfied with anything, keeps the drive going. But, you know, as far as shows that have been inspiring for some of the work that we've done, at least on shows, Roberto, there's like, it's amazing because there's really lots of episodes have their own inspiration.
Absolutely. I was about to say that's kind of what I was going to say, is that each episode, it's its own kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, it's its own thing. It's, you know, and like, I remember when we started on Riverdale, at the very beginning, you were talking about Zodiac a lot, you know, and Zodiac was a big thing. And then it got into, you know, multiple different inspirations as we would go. And then, you know, Sabrina had all of its own, and Katy Keene had its own. I think Katy Keene, a lot of it came from, Maggie and I created in the pilot, before we did the pilot, we created this movement reel and this kind of color palette reel package, you know, like lookbook that we presented to Roberto in the studio. And Amélie, the French film Amélie, was huge in that, as far as the movement, the camera, you know, the way that they use the movement in that show is phenomenal. And the color palette is this very rich, warm color. And as soon as we started talking about the richness and the warmth of that show, and we were looking at it, we're like, this is, you know, if you look at the skin tones of what Audrey Tautou is in there, I mean, it's not real. It doesn't look like our skin, but we bought into that world and we embraced it. And as soon as you believed it, then you were in, and it was fine. And so we kind of scaled it back a little bit. We didn't go as far, but we definitely took that kind of as an inspiration, as far as like warmth and being able to kind of go with this extra romantic feel. But really it comes down to like just being inspired by great films. Like, you know, I could watch Blade Runner, which is, you know, sci-fi and is, you know, the best looking film in so many years, I think. And it can inspire me for Katy Keene, not because, you know, it should look like it, but because the quality of the photography in that, the art direction in that, and just everything that they did was so phenomenal that inspires me into everything I do, you know, and I take that from multiple levels.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny, Brendan. Amelie was a film I was going to reference as well. And I think from the very beginning, when you're looking into Katie's apartment window, and you kind of know that you're in a really, really heightened world. And I remember after after we finished shooting the pilot, we went to see a cut, and like in New York, like in many shows that shoot in New York or set in New York, there were a lot of stock shots to establish New York in the pilot. And I remember my first thought was like, take every stock shot out, because everything that Brendan and Maggie shot was so specific and beautiful, and you didn't want it bumping up to a stock shot of New York that could be in any show. And I think we did a lot of digging. I think we finally found like 3 or 4 stock shots that felt within the visual world that Brendan and Maggie had created. And but I remember thinking, oh no, every stock shot, take it out. We're starting with this beautiful window. So I mean, it was all that stuff. And I remember that it was tricky because we didn't have any drones or anything.
Yeah.
So we were dependent on what was out there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that first shot, because that, I think, was probably, it was amazing how you utilized that. And you guys both talked about how you wanted to create New York as a character. And in that first shot, you did. And there was a sense of claustrophobicness there. And using a 2-to-1 ratio with anamorphic lenses and being claustrophobic, those they don't really go together, but at the same time it did. And that first shot was just really great. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Go ahead, Brendan.
I was just gonna say that was a challenge. I remember doing that one. Like, I don't know, Roberto,
I wasn't there. I know that it was like inside tiny. That so it literally was that you'd only dressed what was visible through the window.
Yeah.
But no, talk about it.
Well, I mean, that whole day, I think we did that the same day that we did the end scene, which was the proposal. And we're in the Lower East Side on a Thursday or something, or a Friday night, Thursday night. And it was just like, party central. There's people and clubs everywhere, and people just, going to get pizza at 3 a.m. that are just hammered, and they're, trying to get in front of the camera, and all these different things happening. And I remember, like, we were shooting that shot, and Maggie and I were, Maggie was upstairs in the building with the actors, and I was downstairs with the camera team, and we were talking through radios, obviously, and we're doing this shot, trying to like get it to work with keeping the streets, clean, because you can see the street off to the side on the left. We're trying to keep it clean of a bunch of 100 drunk people just running up and down, and it was such a challenge. But I remember, like, the whole idea with that shot was, because it was the opening shot of the show, of the entire series, was to create this world that felt cold, this kind of like cold New York outside of this apartment, with this little warm, safe zone inside. And you see this window that just pops this like very warm, loving feel that is Katy, young Katy, and her mom. And her mom's teaching her everything that's going to make Katy who she is, all these things that make Katy who she becomes. And we wanted to create this like kind of warm safety net inside, in juxtaposition to this cold exterior. So it was really, like, to me at least, it was, and to Maggie and I, it was really like something that really set everything off in motion, like really established the whole thing, and let it kind of go forward from there, of what was, the challenges that everyone was going to be facing as they go forward, and kind of where these worlds collide, and how internal conflicts that people have with the outside. And again, it being New York, that's the entire story as it goes forward, is just these 4 friends making their dreams come true in New York. That is not an easy city. It's as
captured that in one shot, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost felt like you were going into a fairy tale too, because you had the reality and then you move into that window and it's like a fairy tale perfect existence inside that room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a few minutes left, but out of curiosity, with everything that's going on in the world and the pandemic, what have both of you been doing to stay creative during this time? And if I'm not mistaken, you guys were doing the Bride's pilot, and it got shut down because of this, correct?
Yeah, Brendan and Maggie and I were doing a pilot, a sort of a New York Gothic about the Brides of Dracula in New York. And we were actually, the first week we were shooting outside of the city in Yonkers, I believe.
Mhm.
We found this beautiful manor, and we were scheduled to spend the entire week there. And as it turned out, sort of the first epicenter of COVID was in New Rochelle, which was very close. We were something like 3 miles from it, and we kind of were in our bubble, and we kept working, and we'd hear things, and more hand sanitizers were appearing all around.
Mhm.
And I remember that we shot all that week, and we were going to shoot on a Saturday because we'd gotten word that all production was going to shut down. And I remember, we Maggie and I, we gathered everyone, and we said, so, no one really knows what's going on. But I remember, this is how naive I was. We said, so we're going to shut down for 2 weeks, and then we're going to start back up again. So that was kind of what we said. And then, it very quickly, we very quickly realized that this was a lot bigger than 2 weeks. And yeah, we got through, almost, about a third of the shooting.
Yeah. All
And
at
is
one
your intentions
location.
to finish it up? Are you hope to finish it up?
Yeah, we hope so. We've been we even though we'd only shot 5 days, we shot some. I mean, Brendan and Maggie shot beautiful stuff with our brides, and we I think on the last day we got some Dracula and some of the horror in it. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been cutting a sizzle reel to kind of showcase the episode, and I've been working on an additional script for it. So we're hoping to finish it one way or the other, for sure.
Good.
That's good.
There's one last little question I kind of wanted to ask that came across here. This is from Dylan again. Excited to check out Katy Keene. Archie Comics has a rich history of characters. Any other spin-offs from Archie Riverdale that are in the works?
That's a really good question. We after we done Riverdale and Sabrina, the one kind of marquee character that we hadn't yet done was Katy Keene, and I think that the other thing we wanted to do with the show was we wanted to give a stronger showcase to Ashley Murray, who plays Josie of Josie and the Pussycats. She was in Riverdale, which was a noir and crime and pulp. It was hard to tell music stories about a musician and an artist. So when we were conceiving of Katy Keene, we thought, this will be a great way to showcase Ashley. There's been talk about other spin-offs from Riverdale, and other characters within the Archie library, which has superheroes, and it also has crime comics and things like that. So we have been talking about that, but nothing that I can announce for sure.
Well, I mean, we're just about an hour up, but this was amazing. I mean, I could keep going and going and going, but I know you guys have a lot going on and you're busy, and we really want to thank you both for taking the time. And it was really great listening to both of you chat. And it was an honor to have you.
It was
And
a total,
it's been
total
great.
pleasure. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, thank you.
We don't get to chat as much because we're so busy. So this is
Yeah,
nice.
it's true. Yeah.
Thank you guys for doing it. It's great. And it's nice to just sort of peer into your world when you guys are talking back and forth.
Yeah, it is. It's great to see that, watch that. And the final episode drops tonight, right?
The final
That's
episode.
right.
I know I can't. You kind of can't believe it. It feels like years ago in some ways, and then like it happened so fast. You know, no, it's incredible and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful episode.
It's a great episode.
Maggie, who directed the pilot, came back to do the finale. So it was, and we revisited a lot of our locations from the pilot. So it really feels like coming home.
Yeah.
Anything you can tell us about it, or?
Yeah, spoilers? Any
There
spoilers?
are so many cliffhangers, so many musical numbers. There's a Riverdale villain makes an appearance, and you know, kind of one of my favorite things is there's a really emotional scene between Katy and her on again off again boyfriend KO in Grand Central Station, which to me is so iconic and so New York. There's tons of cliffhangers. It's really it's everything the show set out to be on a huge scale. I love it.
Yeah,
We're looking forward to it. And again, many thanks, and be well, stay safe.
Same with you guys.
yeah, same with you.
Appreciate all this time.
So much,
Yeah.
guys.
Of
Thank
course,
you.
a pleasure.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.